Welcome to the fastest stop in town. Today we're Masaf this Yevamot stuff. Tzadik Zion. We're going to begin on Tzadik Zion Amud Aleph by the new Mishnah, new Parak. So the Mishnah tells us as follows: Noisin al ha'anusa val ha'mafuta. Says Rashi, le'ach she'ana sumafata seisha. A person either raped or seduced a woman, in which there are clear psukim in the Torah about this. Rashi says that muta lisa bita va'achleisa v'ima. A person is now allowed to marry her relatives, her daughter, her sister, her mother, which the Gemara is going to discuss. Ha'oinis va'mafata anasua. A person who's oinis mafata al hanasua, namely the relative of his wife, chayev. So that individual is going to be held accountable and punished. And then we have a often quoted part of this Mishnah in many places. Naise Adam anusas aviv mafutas aviv, anusas beno mafutas beno. That the father can marry a woman in which his son, or the other way around, a son can marry a woman whose father was either ma'anis or mafata. So it's allowed in either way. Even the son is allowed to marry this woman because they weren't married. Rabbi Yehuda oiser banusas aviv mafutas aviv. Rabbi Yehuda disagrees and says the son is not allowed to marry a woman in which the father was ma'anis or mafata. And on this Rashi says mafarish taima. So we'll see it soon. So tinino hada tanarbana. So we have a brayso in support to our Mishnah. Anas isha. So again, in the situation where a person was ma'anis, a woman, mutter lisa bita, you're allowed to marry her daughter. Even though you're mafata this woman, you're ma'anis this woman, you can marry her daughter. Nasa isha, aser lisa bita. However, once you would marry this woman, then it's now aser to marry her daughter. So if all you were is ma'anis mafata, then you could marry the daughter. However, once you actually married the woman you're ma'anis mafata, then at that point not. Or minhu. So we're asked the question: Hanitan min isha. A person, there's rumors, there's a call that went out that you were with this particular woman. So aser be'ima uvita v'achleisa. Clearly it says that it's aser. There is an iser to be with their mother, their daughter, their sister. So how could we say, if you're ma'anis and mafata a woman, that you're still allowed to be with her relatives? It's not true. It says beferish over here, even by suspicion, that you're no longer allowed to be with this woman's relatives. So the answer is midrabanan. Says Rashi, the whole time that we say is aser is not midaraisa, because technically midaraisa, it's mutter. However, there's a gezerah. Says Rashi, gezerah shema le'achar sheisas bita. After you marry the daughter, what would happen if yizna im harishayna? Let's say you were mizana with the original one, the woman that you were ma'anis mafata. V'habi oynis mafata al nasnua. This is a case of being ma'anis mafata on the woman who you were of the relative of your wife. So it's hard to understand. Our Mishnah sounds like it's okay, noisin, go ahead. You're allowed to go ahead and marry her relatives, which sounds like l'chatchila. So why would we use this language of noisin if we're talking about a situation where it really should not be done? In fact, there's an Isser Midrabanan against it. So our answer is Kitanan Mas Nisin. When does our Mishnah say that's totally allowed? Is Li'achar Misa. Says Rashi, Shemesa Hanusa V'Mafuta. At the situation where the woman that you're ma'anis mafata, there is no problem. There's no reason to be geyser, you marrying the daughter, and then all of a sudden you may go back to this woman because she's dead. So therefore, our Mishnah is after the woman you're ma'anis died. So now you're allowed to marry her relatives. So how do we know this is true? The Tanur Bekula Nemar Shchiva. When it comes to all the different arayos and parshas kedoshim, it uses the language of shchiva. Tiu b'kalaso, dodato, b'zocher, b'behema. It mentions the language of physically lying down with them. The kan nemer kicha. But over here, when it talks about a woman and the mother, that it says the language of kicha. So loimuchad derech likuchin asr Torah. It's coming to tell you the only time it's asr to take her is only once you're married to her. Then you can't take the relative. However, if let's say you're only ma'anas mafata, then you are allowed to take the relative. Armule rapapula by el miata. If that's the case, gabi achoso. When it comes to the sister, they say also ish asher yikach asachoso. It says the same language of yikach when a man takes a sister, bas abu bas imo. So hachanam derech kichahu daser. Is the whole iser only the time when you're married? Derech shriva shari. But in the case where you were lying down with the sister, then it's mutter to take the sister? Of course not. It doesn't make any difference. Charmlei lukuchin ksive b'tayra stam. Haroi lukicha. Kicha haroi l'shchiva shchiva. So lukuchin, when it's stam written, that means it's fit. People who are fit for lukicha. Says Rashi, shahaisri shaina lukuchasai chayav al shniya k'shabaleha. It's talking about when you would if you were to marry the first one, then the second one, if you had relations with, you would be chayav. However, in this case, you're right. When it comes to the sister, that is shchiva. It's kicha roy l'shchiva. Shchiva. Rabbi Omer anas isha mutter lisa bita. According to Rabbi, he says, in a situation where a person is ma'anis a woman, you are allowed to marry the daughter. And you can learn it out mahacha from a different pasuk. Siv, erbas bas bincha bas bidcha, lo sigala. What do we derive? You cannot reveal this relationship. Mashma habas bina dida ubas bita dida goli. That you are allowed to, so to speak, reveal. Uksiv erbas isha uvita lo sigale as bas bina as bas bita lo sikach haketzad. So kan b'oinsin kan b'nisuin. So again, if you're only ma'anis, then the relatives are going to be mutter. However, if you were married, then the relatives will be usher. So epachana, araya sher ksibahu, b'nisuin ika sher b'oinsin leika sher. So since it mentions the language of sher, which is talking about a marriage that's like your wife, so that's talking about nisuin. When we talk about oinsin, we're not, someone's ma'anis, you don't use the language of share because it's not someone who is your spouse. Question 11, and then we'll see TB 21 as well. Question 11. Anas isha, if you're ma'anis a woman, ha'im mutter vita. Are you mutter to the daughter? Are you mutter to the daughter? So we said, it's totally on koid before misana. B'chayeha, while she's still alive, it's an issur d'Rabbanan. L'yachar misa mutter. And on this TB 21 is a little bit more, explains a little bit more. He says like this: Kaidim misas hanusa, before the woman who is ma'anis dies, a noisin midrabanan. You're not allowed to marry her relatives. Gezer shemel achar shiisa. What if after you married the relative, as the daughter, yizna im harishayna? What if you're mizana with the first one because you already had relations with her before? Avli achar misasa. Once the woman you were ma'anis died, then leika lamigzer midi mutter. Since there's no reason to be geyser, because what are you gonna? You're not going to go back to her. She's dead. So therefore, because of that, it's going to be mutter to marry the relative. Okay. And then we have this machlokus Tanakam Rabbi Yehuda. Is there an issur for a son to marry the anusas aviv mafutas aviv? So Rabbi Yehuda oisib anusas aviv b'chul. So I'm Rav Gidol and Rav. My time Rabbi Yehuda, and this is mentioned many places. The lo yikach yishes eishes aviv. A person allowed to marry his father's wife, and then it says lo yigal kanaf aviv. Seems to be a little bit repetitive. So what does that mean? It's kanaf. It's the garment. Shra aviv lo yigala. So what does that mean? It means if your father somehow had relations with a woman, namely who's ma'anas mafata, the first one of the pasuk is saying you can't take your father's wife ever because she's like your mother-in-law. But even if they weren't married, if she was your ma'anis mafata, you're also not allowed. And that's how Rabbi Yehuda learns. Mamai de ma'anu saksiv. The chsiv mi'alei the Qur'an, it says in the pasuk v'nosan isha shoycha v'imol avi hanara chamishim kasef. It talks about ma'as mafata that you have to pay the father 50 kesef for a fine. So therefore, since it's in juxtaposed to the psukim of onis mafata, so therefore that's what it's coming to tell you. The Rabbanan who say that a son is allowed to marry a nusas aviv, mafutas aviv. If these psukim were really right next to each other, then kiddukamrit. So you would be right. I couldn't argue with you. But hashlu samachle, but they're not really so close. Meboyle, therefore we need it to teach us a different thing. What does it mean lo yigal kanaf aviv? It's not talking about nusas aviv. Rather, it could have we're talking about the situation where your father's brother died and they didn't have a child, so his wife is now a shemer yavam to your father. So he's not married to her yet. He didn't do yibum yet, but at that state you are not allowed to take her, and therefore that would not be a marriage. Again, we even discussed. Forget about it being the son, whether or not if she was a shemer yavam, she would go l'shuk. Whether kedushin is taifsin, there's a machlokas. If even Rav says you don't have to have a get, Shmuel says you do. So mamai kanaf aviv, kanaf a royal aviv loyigal. It doesn't mean he actually was with her yet, but it's fit because she's a shemer yavam. So but typically mishum dodato. Why don't the Rabbanan learn it out from a different isser? She is your aunt. She's usher anyway, right? Because the reality is, she is your father's brother. This is your father's brother's wife, which is your aunt. So she's usher to you anyway. So avle mishnei lavin. Say that there's a second lav. But table mishum yevamot shuk. Shouldn't be the same thing as we said. It's yevamot shuk. That she has shemer shavim going to him. So aleha b'shloish lavin. Actually, there's going to be 3 lavin. So that's what it means. That it's going to be actually 3 lavin. And this, I think, is actually a question, somewhat of a difficult question. I think this was a TA question. TA maybe 20. Habal shemer yavim shel aviv b'chai aviv mishum elu gimel shemos hu chayiv aliba d'Rabbanan. So one is that it's Kinaf Aviv, the other one is Doidasai, and the other one is Yevama LeShuk. That's TA 20. So which is interesting. Normally we don't say, the Torah is just packing on more lavin, and therefore it sounds like Rabbi Yehuda's sheet, this sounds better, which is maybe the reason why we come on to this Iboy Sema. Iboy Sema Achamisa. So actually we have a different answer altogether. So the Iboy Sema, you can learn out from the following. The pasuk says, as we continue to Tzadi Zayin Amud Beis, actually not, Ach me'av the Ibois Ema le'achar misa. Or you can say it's achar misa. Okay, let's stop there. Look at Rashi. Shemes aviv, the father died. Deleka lav diyavam l'shuk. There's no longer an issue of yavam l'shuk. You're saying, why don't we just say it's yavam l'shuk? Well, it's because your father's dead. So it's possible that it's not even a case of Yevamot Shuk, because this woman, she was a Shemesh Yavam, but now your father's dead. So you can't do Yibum. But this woman, since at one point she was a Shemesh Yavam to him, even though now she's free, therefore that in itself would not constitute as a Yevamot Shuk, because she's allowed to get married to whoever she wants, because this man is not alive anymore. Okay. Liach Misa. Now the Gemara goes through a few riddles as we continue to Tzadi Zayin Amud Beis. So we'll go through some of them at greater length than others. We'll do this one because this one is relevant to what we're learning. Achmi Av V'lo Me'em. So who is this person? He is a brother from the father's side, V'lo Me'em, not from the mother. So this person is a half brother. Who Balwa De'em, and he is the husband of this mother. And also Ba'ana Barata De'inte. and I am the daughter of his wife. So, Omer Rami Bar Chama Delo Rabbi Yehuda Demastisen. It's not like our Mishnah of Rabbi Yehuda. What is Rabbi Yehuda? So, what this is talking about, obviously, is a nusas aviv, because that's what the machlokas is in our Mishnah. It's talking about a situation where the father was ma'anis a woman, and Rabbi Yehuda says the son is not allowed to marry her. But according to this, it's a situation where the son ends up marrying the woman in which his father was ma'anis. So in other words, let's say Reuven was ma'anis Rachel, and then had a child, Leah. Now Reuven, in addition to being ma'anis Rachel, he also had a son Shimon from a totally different woman. And now Shimon goes and marries Rachel. Now, again, this is obviously not according to the Shita of Rabbi Yehuda, because Rabbi Yehuda says that Shimon would not be allowed to marry Rachel because that's a nusas aviv. However, this is still a situation of where it's you have a brother only from the father's side, not from the mother, where it's the husband of my mother, and I am the daughter of his wife. Okay, fine. So then the Gemara continues to flesh out all these different other cases. Achu, I am his brother, Ubrihu, and his son. Achte ana, dahai didarina aksafe. And I am the child that is on my shoulder. Mishkachas la b'oiv kachavim habal bitai. So you say this is referring to a case in which you have a ovi kachavim who has relations with his daughter. Shalom malach bari bas achasech ana mishkachas la b'oiv kachavim habal bas bitai. So this case is where you have an ovi kachavim who has relations with his granddaughter. Dalohi dalo dalva, referring to the drawing of water. Lipol b'chu seiser peser. Dahai didarina hu bar. The one who drew the water is the son. Va'ana barat. I am the daughter. Achua of the brother. Mishkachas l'b'ovi kachavim habal bas benoi. A person, an ovi kachavim who has relations with his son's daughter. Bi'ah mi'ach, wailing from the brother. It says Rashi, kaiveles ani al achi shu aviu. I'm wailing about my brother. V'hu av is my father. V'hu bal is my husband. V'hu barbal, he's the son of my husband. V'hu balwa de'im, and he's the husband of my mother. V'yana, and I, barata de'inte, I'm the daughter of his wife. V'yahiv pita lachuha. Yasmi b'nei brate. So mishkachas b'chama bal imoi. Talking about a situation where Ovi Chavim has relations with his mother. The Hoylid Mimenu Bas, and they have a daughter. The Chazu Val Oisabas, then he has tashmish with his daughter. The Chazer Zakein, and then the grandfather comes, Uboa, and has relations with her. The Hoylid Mimenu Banim, and has children. Okay, so again, it's a little bit of a tongue twister. We can kind of like flesh this out greater, but again, these are all different possible cases that all these things could be the same, happening simultaneously. Anava at ache, I and you were brothers. Anava vuch ache, I and and your father are brothers. Anava imech ache, I and your mother were siblings. Mishkachas v'chachavim babal imay. He has relation with his mother, and they have two daughters together. And this Ovi Chachavim then afterwards goes and has tashmish with one of these two women. They have a son. And he's called the mother's sister. And he says, so I am. So the question is, this could also be in a proper way. It could go on Reuven Sheish Shtei Banim. She has Reuven has two daughters. Yosef Shimon, then Shimon comes. V'nosav Chad Minayu. So Shimon comes along and marries one of Reuven's two daughters. Yosef Bar Levi, then Levi comes. V'nosav Chad Minayu, marries one of them. The Carmele Berei de Shimon, and they're called the son of Shimon, Levar Berei de Levi, which is the grandson of Levi. Okay, ayin this a little bit more to really flesh this whole out. Okay, let's see the next Mishnah. Hagiyaresh is Gairu, so you have someone that converts, Boneha Ima. And not only do they convert, they also convert together with her two sons. Now, what happens if, let's say, one of those sons dies? There's no chalitzer yibum done with the other brother. Why? After all, this woman shares two sons. So Rashi says, Di achva min ab bi'inan. It has to be that they're brothers, paternal brothers. Bi'inan. V'ger ein lo sher ha'av. And they're not considered to be related to the father. So even if, let's say, they have the same father, but we consider that like they're not paternal brothers, and therefore because of that, there's no chalitzer yibum. Even let's say one of the children, while he was conceived, they weren't Jewish, but then she converted while he was pregnant. She was pregnant, and then he was born as a yid. And the second brother was even conceived Jewish. Doesn't make any difference. The din still is that there's no yibur mechalitza. So too when it comes to a shivcha that becomes freed together with her children, again, there's not going to be any din yibur mechalitza. So b'nei Yudan amta ishtachor. So the Gemara talks about this case of this maidservant who became freed. So Sholo Rav Achbar Yaakov minsav nishei dahadadi. So he allowed them to be able to marry one to each other. Says Rashi, Eishas Achiv, his brother's wife. Vlamishum yibum. This has nothing to do with yibum. Elafil b'makom banim. Even if there's kids, the ksaver ein korvul ager the katan shenayel dami. The fact that they may seemingly be related by blood, we say that a gershon is gairis kikatan, and therefore because of that, even though they're related, they're allowed to get married to another. Amalei Rava Ibaho Rav Sheshes Aser. Rav Sheshes said that you can't marry the widow of your brother. So Amalei, who Aser? You're right. He said Aser Vanasharina. I allow it. So it depends. Min ha'av, so it seems like a machlokas. So min ha'av, if the two brothers have the same father, v'lo min ha'aim, but not the same mother, kum lo pligi shari. In that situation, they can marry each other's relatives. If all they're related to is min ha'av. Min ha'aim, v'lo min ha'av, let's say they're only connected to the mom, kum lo pligi aser. So min ha'rabanan, we say that they're aser to marry one another. Ki pligi min ha'av u min ha'aim. When they actually are full brothers. Mandishari basar abashadinan. When it comes to, says this mutter, says we still go after the father. Dehabene plani karluhu. And therefore, because that's what they're called, so again, when it comes to a father, we consider, once there's gerus, that it's the after kazer behema. And therefore, if we focus on the father, halakhically, he's not considered like the father. Rav Sheshes karli nami b'nei ploinus. That they're also called b'nei ploinus, when it's going after the mother. And since we're going after the mother, so therefore, because of that, it would actually be, they would be usher to another. Says Rashi, Nishei hadadi eshasachav v'lamishum. Okay, we did that. So min ha'em v'lo min av. If let's say they're related only through the mother, not the father, everyone says they're usher. The asa achlufim b'Yisrael, because if they're related to the mother, so you would think it looks like a Jew, and that's how we connect them. So therefore, we're not going to allow them to marry one to each other. Actually, they also argue in a situation where their brothers from the mother and not from the father. My timer, as we've said many times, and therefore because of that, maybe they're allowed to marry one another even though they're related through the mother. Tanan. Hagiyarish is Gairu Baneha. So we learned in our Mishnah, if you have a convert and two of her children convert with her, my time Asiri. The reason why is because it's usher for them to marry each other's relatives. So it seems very fairish that it's not allowed, even though they have the same mother. Lo, the einu b'teres chalitza v'yibum, b'sharil alma. The reality is because they don't fall under the category of being b'teres chalitza v'yibum. That's the reason why, and therefore they're mutter to the world. The inhu nami sharu. So therefore they're allowed to marry each other as well. Afilu. So Rabbi Shalom Asiri Hanetani Afilu. The Afla the Rishon Harasa Shab Kedusha, Vlidas Kedusha. Even though the first one was conceived not by Kedusha, but Sheni Harasa Vlidas Kedusha, the Kishtei Imaso Imohistamu. So one was conceived with Kedusha, one was conceived without Kedusha. It almost is like there's two different mothers. Afilu Hachi Asiri. They're still usher to one another. El Iyamrit Sharu Mayafilu. What is that coming to add? Our answer is the Afagad that Tervaihu lay Dasim Kedusha, even though they were both born as Jews, the Yasla Chalupim Yisrael, and therefore you can get confused. The Fil Hachi Shari. So that's the Chiddush. We're not geyser because of Dilma Asila Chalupim Yisrael. Igad Yami Hachi Nami Mistarba, the Sharu, the Katania Filu. So Iyamar Bishlam Sharu that they're allowed to each other. Hained Tanya Filu. The Afghan to violate Das Kedusha. Even though they were both born as hidden, the Yaslachu Yisrael feel Hachi Sharu. El Iyamar Siri so Maya Filu. The Afghan the Rishon Haras Kedusha Mishlei Das Kedusha. The Sheni Haras Le Das Kedusha. The Kishtei Ima Istami Afil Hachi Asiri. You would think maybe they're like two different different mothers, and therefore because that they should be mutter one another. No, it's still considered to be usher. They're still usher to one another. Tashma, Shnei Achin Toimin. If you have two brothers who are twins that are Gerim, Lachain Mishucharorim, Lo Cholz and Lo Miyamin. They don't do Chalitz or Yibam together. Vein Chayam Mishum Eishes Ach. There's also no Isser of Eishes Ach. If he would take his brother's wife. And then this is the key line. Hayisa Harasin Shlob Kedusha V'Leidasim Kedusha. Let's say these twins were conceived as not as Jews, but they were born as Jews. There's no din chalitz or yibam. But there is an issue of eshes ach. And let's say they were even conceived as Jews, obviously harihin ki Yisraelim l'chol divrein. They're considered to be Yidden like all things, because even at the time of consumption, they were Jews. Katani mi is, you still learn in chayam mishum eshes ach. So it says beferish that they're not chayav for eshes ach. Where it says chayuva leika ha'isur ika, which is mashma actually that it's still usher. Where it says no huadin, as we continue in Sadi Chesed Aleph, diafilu isur nami leika. There's no isur. I did the boy mistake seifa abul chayavin taninami reisha in chayavin. But the truth is there's no isur either. Amar Rabba hadi Amar Rabbanan ein av lamitzri. When we said before that there is no father to a Mitzri, what does that mean? Lo tema mishum dilishtufi bezima. It's not because of that particular group of people they were steeped in immorality. Dul yadia, that they just don't know who the father is. Abu yadia, but if somehow we knew who the father was, chayshinan, then we would be concerned of who that is. Elafil diyadia nami lechashinan. Even we do know. If you have two twins, the tipa achas hoya, they all came from the same drop. The nechlo shtayim, and we divide them like they're two. The katani seifa lo chaltzol miyamin. So shema mina afkuri afkir rachman lazare. It's just because it's considered like their zera is hefker. Dechsiv basar chamar besarim. It's like donkeys. Bezirma susim. Zirmasam, and it's likened to horses. Okay, let's stop here. Let's see maybe another question. Let's see, we did 20. Actually, before I move on, let's see if there's another question over here. Question 12. Shnei Achen. Okay, so he had two brothers who were twins. Shahaisa Haras and Shlob Kedusha. They were conceived not as Jews. V'leidasim b'kedusha, right? But they ended up Haisa harasa shel kedusha v'ledas b'kedusha. So this is actually the very bottom of Tzadi Zayin Beis. Madinu inin yibam b'chalitza. So it says beferish over here. Lo cholzin v'lo miyamin. We don't do chalitza or yibum in this situation. This is question 12. Then it says umadinam le'inin yibum b'chalitza le'inin kares de'eshes ach umatam. So the tzad yibum min avu rachman afkir l'zeravihem v'chayavim kares mishum eshes ach min ha'em sharihi kisraelis shioldis bonim. Okay, let's look at maybe part of the next daf also. TB 22. Gersha isa harasa shlo b'kedusha. V'leidas b'kedusha he'im mutter b'chaisai min ha'em. Are you allowed to take the sister from the mother? Shanod l'fanav shlo b'kedusha umadua. So he said, ha'im ger haya leidas b'kedusha v'harasa shlo b'kedusha. If let's say they were born not as Yidden, shenasa achos ha'em min ha'av, or achos ha'em min ha'av, sarach l'haitzi. Aliba de chacham. Okay. That sounds like Tzadi Zayin Beis. And then we have TA. Maybe it's the same question. Him ger shahaya leidas b'kedusha v'harasa shlo b'kedusha mina'av l'haitzi alib the chachamim. Mamish the exact same question, and he just says achas ha'av mina'aim yoitzi achas ha'aim mina'av yikayim adkan.